In the dead of night, lashed by the wall's icy winds, Jon Snow fell, stabbed by his treacherous brothers. The cold of the snow mixed with the warmth of his own blood as his final strength left him. The light faded. Melisandre, her eyes steeped in shadows and ancient words, chanted a prayer to the Lord of Light before the lifeless body. But something different happened. Jon opened his eyes suddenly, as if emerging from a suffocating nightmare. He was sweating even though he felt freezing cold. It was as if he had returned from the deep void. But something was different when he opened his eyes. He was no longer at Castle Black, nor in the dark room where he had died. The stone ceiling above him was familiar, very familiar. The room where he awoke was the one where he had spent much of his youth. He recognized the tapestries, the old chest in the corner, even the smell of Winterfell's wood. His heart pounded. Was he alive? Was he dreaming? The memories of the betrayal, the wall, the whites, and the dead brothers were still too vivid. He rose, trembling, gasping, staggering to the door. He walked the corridors as if in a trance, each step taking him deeper into a time he believed lost. Turning a corner, he heard childish laughter. His world stopped when he saw Arya, still small, running after Bran, who ran on his own legs, followed by Rickon, alive and laughing. Further ahead, Sansa and Catelyn sewed in silence, and, to his complete astonishment, Ned Stark emerged from the stone staircase, calm as always. Jon looked at him as if facing a ghost. But it was real. In tears, he ran to the man he had never had the right to call father and hugged him tightly, saying he had missed him. Ned returned the hug, confused, but kind. This wasn't a dream. Jon was back, and everything was about to begin again. Several hours passed before Jon could gather his thoughts. At first, he tried to convince himself he had dreamed it all. The wall, the wildlings, the war, the betrayal, Daenerys, the White Walkers. It all seemed too impossible to be real. But the feelings didn't fade. Every detail of what he had lived or dreamed remained with unsettling clarity. When he saw the royal carriage approaching Winterfell's gates, his heart froze. He knew exactly what would come next. Robert asking Ned to go to King's Landing. Tragedy was near. Now he knew. And this time he would not stand idle. Driven by a sense of urgency, Jon sought Ned in private. He asked for a conversation away from all ears. He looked into the eyes of the man he had always respected and, without hesitation, began telling things he should not know. He spoke of Peter Baelish's betrayal, the unjust imprisonment that would follow, Tyrion's trial, the Red Wedding, Robb's death, and the shadows rising in the north. Ned reacted as if hearing madness, but Jon went further. He mentioned the Tower of Joy, Lyanna's past, the secret Bran would see once he gained the gift of green sight. Ned turned pale. That no one else could know. No one except someone who had seen the impossible. Disbelief gave way to doubt, and doubt opened space for hope. Ned didn't understand how or why, but Jon's conviction was overwhelming. Still, the old wolf of the north was cautious. He agreed to listen and observe. The royal party arrived, and all were received with hospitality. Days passed, and when Bran left to climb the tower of the fortress, Jon forbade him. He insisted the father go with him instead. They hid in the shadows and witnessed, with their own eyes, the Lannister twins together in secret. Jaime and Cersei, incest, the root of all war to come. There, the future split in two. It was in Winterfell that the truth came to light. Ned took in what Jon had told him and summoned Robert. Then he carefully revealed the evidence that the Queen's children were in fact Jaime's bastards. The news fell like thunder upon the king. At first, Robert refused to believe it. But Jon, beside Ned, unraveled thread by thread the web of lies, proving through reports and revelations that everything made sense. Jon Arryn's death, Cersei's role, the intrigues of King's Landing, every piece fit. The furious king ordered the twins arrested immediately. Jaime and Cersei were taken in chains, separated, and escorted to the capital. On the return journey, Robert didn't stop asking questions. He wanted to know more. He wanted to understand how Jon knew so much. Ned intervened, always trying to protect his nephew's secret, but Robert was already too fascinated. Jon shared part of what he had seen, including threats beyond the wall, the rise of the dead, and the impending fall of civilization if nothing was done. Robert didn't laugh. He didn't mock. For the first time, he took it all seriously. Only the three of them knew. The weight of the truth was too great to spread. But the king stood with the wolves. Upon arriving in the capital, Robert summoned trials. He did not sentence Cersei's children to death, but declared them illegitimate bastards and exiled them to Casterly Rock. Jaime was tried and removed from the Kingsguard before being executed for treason. Cersei Lannister was also tried and executed for treason and murder. Tywin Lannister, furious, swore revenge, but King's Landing began to change. Inspired by the revelations of Jon Snow and Ned Stark, who were always at his side, Robert began a purge of the throne. Punishing traitors, removing corrupt advisors, and, at their request, refrained from sending assassins after Daenerys Targaryen. They prepared the realm for the war no one saw. The first reports from the Wall were taken seriously. Robert sent reinforcements, supplies, and envoys to the north. Samwell Tarly, still new to the Night's Watch, didn't know Jon personally, but soon felt trust in the knight who spoke for the king and was very kind to the poor boy. Even so, Jon was very kind to the smart, chubby boy of the Night's Watch and gave him freedom to research the walkers. At the Wall, Snow was received with suspicion by some, but Jeor Mormont, commander of the Watch, listened to his words, or rather, the words of the knight appointed by the king himself and who represented his will, with full attention. Jon reported every possible future. The march of the Night King, the fall of Hardhome, Craster's betrayal, and the dead rising under the frozen sky. Jeor, experienced and wise, did not ignore the clarity with which the young man spoke and was impressed by the secrets he believed only he knew. Jon was given freedom to organize expeditions and sent trusted rangers to accompany him. They began to reinforce the defenses, dig trenches, stockpile food, and send ravens requesting obsidian, the much-needed dragonglass. Jon did not stop. He led groups beyond the Wall even before the winter tightened. He reached Mance Rayder, the king beyond the Wall, and surprised him with unthinkable proposals for any other ranger. An alliance. He explained in detail the common threat. Mance, reluctant, agreed to talk. With this, Jon gained allies among the wildlings. But the wildlings were the first to notice the common enemy. And of course, Jon watched Ygritte from afar when he found her. He didn't have the courage to speak to her after what had happened, but he was glad to see she was still alive. The tragedy of Hardhome, which in the original timeline nearly wiped out the wildlings, was avoided. Jon arrived early, leading rangers and reinforcements. Thousands of lives were saved. He saw with his own eyes the first groups of the army of the dead and used improvised dragonglass grenades. With minimal losses, he managed to evacuate Hardhome and bring the survivors to the Wall. Ned and Robb, in constant communication with him, ensured the gates were opened. For the first time in centuries, the wildlings stepped into Westeros as guests, not invaders. This change generated distrust but also respect. The North, led by Ned, understood that the real threat lay beyond old feuds. The wildlings were settled in icy lands north of Last Hearth and Carhold, now deserted by lords who had refused the new order and were removed. The union between peoples began to take shape. Robb Stark strengthened military command, Sansa began acting as a diplomat, and Arya, younger, accompanied training with the soldiers. Jon had initiated a political and cultural transformation unprecedented in the Seven Kingdoms. Meanwhile, Daenerys Targaryen crossed the Narrow Sea with her dragons, Unsullied and Dothraki. But instead of finding a divided Westeros, she encountered a cohesive kingdom led by a voice speaking of the end of the world. Jon sent a raven to her, reporting the dangers they would face and proposing a meeting. Dany hesitated, but as reports of the dead accumulated, she felt she needed to hear that man. Still, some southern houses rebelled, adding more tension to the critical moment. The White Walkers reached the Wall and the first battles took place, and in one of them, Robert Baratheon, even old and corpulent, rode into war once more. Robert and Ned fought together one last time, not against Daenerys, but to hold back the dead that were already spreading across the living lands. They had their moment of glory, but old age and exhaustion caught up with them. The Night King, slowly crossing the deep north, found them personally. They fell in battle, but not in vain. Their resistance allowed the evacuation of thousands. Their bodies, however, were corrupted. Ned Stark and Robert Baratheon became part of the army marching, cold and silent, toward destruction. The news shook all the kingdoms. Daenerys, finally convinced of the threat, met with Jon at Dragonstone. It was a tense meeting, but marked by respect. He showed his strategic knowledge. She showed the power of her dragons. Together, they gathered armies, forged weapons, and devised a plan. Lure the Night King into an ambush at Icefield, north of Winterfell. The dragons were prepared, the armies armed with dragonglass and Valyrian steel. The southern houses, seeing the magnitude of the threat, united. For the first time in centuries, Westeros would fight as one people. With preparation, intelligence, and unity, the army of the dead was held back by defensive lines. Daenerys, riding Drogon, attacked with fire the great groups of dead. Rhaegal and Viserion, guided by trained soldiers, made low flights and destroyed necromancers who reinforced the Night King's armies. Because she had been warned, the Breaker of Chains avoided the death of her colossal fire-breathing children. In return, Jon did not have to fight the undead body of his father or of King Robert, as Daenerys' dragons turned them to ashes. On land, Jon led the cavalry flank, commanding men from the Seven Kingdoms, Unsullied, and Wildlings. He recognized every enemy move and shouted orders with the confidence of someone who had seen that battle before. It was amidst the frozen mist of the final night of combat that Jon faced the Night King. The commander of terror raised his arms to transform the dead bodies around him. But Jon, with dragonglass in hand and the dragons flying overhead, advanced before the enemy could complete his gesture. It was a brutal, intense, almost mythical fight. In the end, Jon struck him in the center of the chest and Drogon dove with sacred flames. The Night King's body shattered like broken ice. With his fall, the dead lost their strength. The survivors screamed, cried, and embraced one another. Many had fallen, but Westeros had survived. Daenerys, covered in soot, landed beside Jon. They looked at each other in silence, understanding the extent of what they had faced. A new world stood before them. Jon knew that difficult choices still lay ahead. But the past that had condemned him had been rewritten. And winter had finally ended. With the end of the war and the fall of the Night King, the world fell into silence for the first time in years. The most experienced advisors gathered in King's Landing to decide the future of the Seven Kingdoms. Now they knew the truth. Both were pure Targaryens. Both were blood of the dragon. But which of them would keep the throne? Would Jon Snow finally sit on the throne? Or would Daenerys sit on something beyond Jon Snow's lap? She had done everything she did to be queen. This opened space for a new form of government to be debated. There were those who wished for a strong and imposing queen like Daenerys. Others demanded a wise and respected king like Jon Snow. But both refused to claim power in the traditional way. Jon, marked by everything he had seen in the future and in battle, believed that the throne had been the root of many tragedies. He preferred to disappear into the north, where he felt he was still needed. But the lords and houses, seeing his sacrifice, leadership, and courage, insisted that he was the only one worthy of ruling. Daenerys, in turn, understood that her dragons were now weapons of peace, not instruments of domination. In an unexpected and noble gesture, she named Jon as the new leader of the realms, not as an absolute king, but as first among equals. And so, Jon Snow was declared the protector of the new order, governing with a council formed by representatives of the great houses and guiding Westeros into an era of rebuilding. He did not sit on an iron throne, but on a simple wooden chair carved by the craftsmen of the north. And it wasn't long before Daenerys revealed the affair between them and both ruled the Seven Kingdoms together. The union between peoples, sealed with fire and blood, found a new path in humility, justice, and in the memory of those who had fallen. And the Seven Kingdoms, for the first time, were not ruled by fear, but by wisdom.